Robert Kennedy brought a lot of pressure on the CIA to do things to foment insurrection against Castro.
Plots in the CIA included assassination, and one scheme in particular angered Robert Kennedy because it involved organized crime and one of his mortal enemies, the mobster Sam Giancana. In Las Vegas, a jealous Giancana hired a private investigator to bug the hotel room of his mistress, the singer Phyllis McGuire. When the crime was exposed, Giancana demanded that the charges be dropped.
No comment.
He bragged that he was involved in a top-secret operation with the government. When word reached Kennedy that a mob boss he was trying to prosecute wanted a favor, he demanded an explanation. He received this memo from CIA lawyer Larry Houston in May of 1962, informing him that Giancana and the mob had been hired by the CIA to murder Fidel Castro. This plot had been hatched by the CIA and authorized during the Eisenhower administration. Kennedy was outraged and intensified his investigation of Giancana.
I think he cracked down hard and harshly to send Giancana a message that whatever he thought the deal was, whatever the CIA had represented the deal to him as being, that it was not a deal.
I think he did not stop the plots, but I think he gathered from Larry Houston that the plots had stopped, and he expressed his disapproval and assumed that meant that they wouldn't continue in the future, but they did in fact continue. Well, I think they misled him and deceived him, and I think all intelligence agencies do that. It's in the nature of the beast.
The nation's underworld gets the unwelcome spotlight of publicity as the Senate's Investigations Subcommittee begins new hearings on crime. Arkansas Senator McClelland is at the helm. Attorney General Robert Kennedy paints a grim picture of the rise of lawlessness under the Cosa Nostra, or Mafia. This he describes as the government of organized gambling, narcotics peddling, extortion, racketeering, and controlling of certain trade unions. He says the income runs into billions. These hearings always attract a large number of spectators. This one is particularly crowded, awaiting the first public appearance of Joseph Velaki, the convicted hoodlum whose confessions to the FBI have reportedly put a price of $100,000 on his head by the infuriated mafia.
As Attorney General, Robert Kennedy made it clear that he would not play favorites with his family's friends. He approved the prosecution of Judge Vincent Keogh. Keogh's brother was a powerful congressman and JFK supporter. He did this even though President Kennedy took the congressman as his guest to the 1962 Army-Navy game as a message to his brother to reconsider the indictment.
I'll tell you why it was important. It was very, very widely known that there was a grand jury investigation and what was going on up in New York. The entire Department of Justice personnel, everybody in the department was looking at that case because this was going to be a test as to whether Bob Kennedy was incorruptible or not. It was that important.
The judge was eventually convicted of bribery, along with the mobster Tony Dux Corallo.
And from then on, everybody in the department knew that Bob Kennedy was not there to fix cases. He was there to proceed with the enforcement of the criminal law, regardless of who the subject matter was about.
His incorruptibility was repeatedly tested. Kennedy rejected an FBI report exonerating Igor Cassini of being an illegal lobbyist for a foreign dictator. Cassini was a friend of Robert's father and of Jacqueline Kennedy's. But when writer Peter Maas exposed Cassini in a magazine article, Kennedy indicted and convicted Cassini.
A couple of months later, I was having dinner with Bobby in New York, and the subject came up. And he said to me, you know, this Cassini case was the last thing I was looking to prosecute. But he said, what's right is right. And from then on, I knew that this was a guy with enormous, maybe unique integrity in politics.
We made some recommendations for legislation which we feel would make a major impact on the operations of the big-time gamblers and racketeers throughout the country.
Kennedy's great achievement as Attorney General came as a gangbuster. Organized crime was in its heyday, and it was Robert Kennedy who turned history's tide and broke the back of the mob. Despite the fact that the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, maintained the fiction that organized crime did not exist. Kennedy surfaced mob informer Joe Valachi on national television in hearings conducted by his old mentor, John McClellan. He increased successful mob prosecutions by 700%.
McClellan wanted Valachi to testify. The Bureau was opposed. There was a big meeting up in Bob's office. I strongly recommended that he be permitted to testify, and he did. And from that point on, there was a general agreement among all law enforcement agencies, state and federal, that this mafia organization existed. That was one of the major achievements of Robert Kennedy's administration.
At the moment President Kennedy was shot, his brother Robert, the Attorney General, was home on a lunch break from a special meeting with federal prosecutors about his war against organized crime. Later that afternoon, he told his aide, Edwin Guthman, "I thought they might get one of us, but I thought it would be me."
He had committed himself to going to a Christmas party for orphans that Mary McGrory, the Washington newswoman, put on every year, and he decided to fulfill that obligation. It was not far from the Justice Department, maybe 8 or 9 blocks. I remember people on the street looking at him. They hadn't seen him. He just had disappeared, just kind of watching him, and he went by them without even seeing them. We got to where the party was going to be. It was on the 2nd floor, and we went upstairs, and he walked in, and I can't tell you how melancholy he was, you know. And he walked in. The adults looked at him. There were a lot of kids, orphans. And one little kid, I think he was maybe about 6 years old, ran towards him, stopped in front of him, and looked up at him and said, "Your brother's dead. Your brother's dead." Well, every adult in that place just wanted to be somewhere else. The kid realized that, without knowing what it was, had said something. He realized he had said something wrong. He started to cry. And I'll never forget this. Bobby just reached down and grabbed him, pulled him up and held him very close to him, and said, "That's all right. I have another one."
Then in June of 1964, the family was dealt still another blow. Senator Edward Kennedy was seriously injured in a plane crash. His back was broken. For a time, the family feared the youngest Kennedy would not live. "Is it ever going to end for you people?" a reporter asked Robert Kennedy. "I was just thinking," he answered, "if my mother hadn't had any more children than her first 4, she would have nothing now. I guess the only reason we've survived is that there are more of us than there is trouble." The senator would remain hospitalized for 6 months.
After the events of November 22nd of 1963, I really had to determine what direction I wanted to go in my own life. And
I wanted to serve President Johnson and the administration for a period of time, but obviously my whole relationship with the administration, my relationship with the government had changed drastically because of those events.
Top secret operation with the government. When word reached Kennedy that a mob boss he was trying to prosecute wanted a favor, he demanded an explanation. He received this memo from CIA lawyer Larry Houston in May of 1962, informing him that Giancana and the mob had been hired by the CIA.
Thought the deal was, whatever the CIA had represented the deal to him as being, that it was not a deal.
I think he did not stop the plots, but I think he gathered from Larry Houston that the plots had stopped, and he expressed his disapproval and assumed that that meant that they wouldn't continue in the future, but they did in fact continue.
The mobster, Sam Giancana. In Las Vegas, a jealous Giancana hired a private investigator to bug the hotel room of his mistress, the singer Phyllis McGuire. When the crime was exposed, Giancana demanded that the charges be dropped.
No comment. I'm sorry.
He bragged that he was involved in a...
Robert Kennedy brought a lot of pressure on the CIA to do things to foment insurrection against Castro.
Plots in the CIA included assassination, and one scheme in particular angered Robert Kennedy because it involved organized crime and one of his mortal enemies to murder Fidel Castro. This plot had been hatched by the CIA and authorized during the Eisenhower administration. Kennedy was outraged and intensified his investigation of Giancana.
I think he cracked down hard and harshly to send Giancana a message that whatever he